struggling single mom falls asleep on a manager's shoulder on a bus, but wakes up shocked when the fluorescent lights of the downtown bus terminal flickered like dying stars against the February dawn. Sarah Martinez clutched her worn purse tighter, checking her phone for the third time in 2 minutes. 6:45 a.m. The 6:47 bus to Riverside Hospital couldn't be late, not today, not when her double shift as a night janitor at the medical center had already pushed her to the breaking point. At 28, Sarah carried the weight of the world in the dark circles under her eyes. Her son Miguel, barely 4 years old, had been battling chronic asthma for 2 years, and the medical bills had turned their small apartment into a house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest wind. The divorce from Carlos had been finalized 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debt and a custody arrangement that felt more like abandonment. The bus wheezed to a stop, its doors opening with a mechanical sigh that seemed to echo Sarah's exhaustion. She climbed aboard, fishing for exact change while scanning the seats. Most were empty at this ungodly hour, occupied only by hospital workers, early commuters, and the occasional person whose story was written in the tired lines of their face. Near the middle, a man in a well-tailored but modest navy suit sat alone, his attention absorbed by a tablet. His car had broken down 3 days ago, a timing belt failure that left his BMW in the shop for a week. As the newly appointed regional manager for a mid-sized logistics company, David Chen couldn't afford to miss his early morning route to various client sites, so he'd reluctantly turned to public transportation. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and his hands moved across the screen reviewing delivery schedules and cost projections. Sarah chose a seat 2 rows behind him, grateful for the relative quiet. As the bus lurched into motion, she leaned her head against the cold window and closed her eyes, trying to steal a few minutes of rest before facing another 16-hour day of cleaning hospital floors and caring for Miguel. The rhythm of the bus, the gentle hum of the engine, and the warmth from the heater combined into a lullaby she couldn't resist. Despite her best efforts to stay alert, exhaustion won the battle she'd been fighting for months. When the bus hit a particularly deep pothole on Maple Street, Sarah's body shifted sideways, her head coming to rest on something solid and warm. In her semi-conscious state, she registered the clean scent of expensive cologne and the soft fabric of what felt like a suit jacket. Some distant part of her mind knew she should move, should apologize, but sleep had claimed her too completely. The man, David Chen, a successful regional manager who'd worked his way up from warehouse floor to corner office, felt the gentle weight against his shoulder and looked down in surprise. He'd been reviewing delivery schedules and logistics reports when this tired young woman had literally fallen into his space. His first instinct was to wake her, to politely reclaim his personal boundary. But something in her face stopped him. Even in sleep, worry lines creased her forehead. Her uniform, the kind worn by hospital cleaning staff, was clean but worn thin from countless washings. Her hands, resting in her lap, showed the calluses and dry skin of someone who worked with harsh chemicals and little time for self-care. There was something achingly familiar about her exhaustion, though David couldn't place where he'd seen that particular brand of bone-deep weariness before. For 20 minutes, David sat perfectly still, barely breathing as the stranger slept against his shoulder. He found himself studying her face, wondering about her story. The wedding ring she still wore despite its obviously cheap metal. The small scar on her chin. The way her breathing occasionally hitched, as if even in sleep she couldn't fully let go of whatever burden she carried. When the bus pulled into the hospital stop, David felt an unexpected reluctance to wake her. But the driver was already calling out the destination, and other passengers were beginning to stir. Gently, so gently it surprised him, David touched her arm. "Miss? We're at the hospital." Sarah's eyes flew open, and for a moment, confusion clouded her features. Then awareness crashed over her like a cold wave. She was leaning against a complete stranger, and not just any stranger, but someone who clearly existed in a completely different world than hers. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, jerking upright so quickly she nearly lost her balance. "I didn't mean to, I'm so sorry." "It's fine," David said quietly, and meant it. "You looked like you needed the rest." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. As she gathered her things, fumbling with her purse strap. I worked double shifts and my son was up all night with his asthma and she stopped herself, realizing she was oversharing with a complete stranger. I'm really sorry. As she hurried toward the bus exit, David found himself standing too. On impulse, he called after her. Wait. Sarah turned, her eyes wide with mortification. David reached into his jacket and pulled out his business card, but hesitated. What was he doing? This woman clearly had enough to worry about without some wealthy stranger complicating her life. Instead, he simply said, I hope your son feels better. The kindness in his voice, unexpected and genuine, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She nodded quickly and fled the bus, disappearing into the early morning crowd heading toward the hospital entrance. David watched her go, an odd feeling settling in his chest. Despite his recent promotion and comfortable salary, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed in such a simple, human way. His apartment was tidy but empty, his calendar filled with logistics meetings and client calls. When was the last time someone had simply needed a shoulder to rest on? The next morning, David's car was still in the shop, so he found himself on the same bus route. When Sarah didn't appear, he felt an unexpected disappointment. It was Friday before he saw her again. This time, she noticed him immediately and chose a seat at the very front of the bus, as far from him as possible. David couldn't blame her for the embarrassment, but he found himself hoping she might at least acknowledge him. The following week brought a harsh cold snap to Chicago. And David's car repair stretched longer than expected. Apparently the timing belt had damaged other components. Sarah's car had also finally given up completely, stranding her with no reliable way to get to work. The bus became their shared lifeline. On Tuesday morning, she was struggling with a particularly heavy bag when she boarded. David watched her fumble with her purse, her uniform, and what looked like medical supplies. When she dropped her inhaler and it rolled toward his feet, he picked it up and handed it to her. Thank you, she said quietly, avoiding his eyes. Is it for your son? David asked gently. Sarah looked up in surprise. You remembered. You mentioned he has asthma. Something in his tone, not pity, but genuine concern, made Sarah's defenses lower slightly. Miguel? He's 4. These winter months are always the worst for him. David nodded, remembering his own childhood struggles with respiratory issues. I had asthma as a kid. It's scary for parents. For the first time, Sarah really looked at him. Despite his expensive clothes and obvious success, there was something unguarded in his expression. It is. Especially when she trailed off. When you're handling it alone, David finished quietly. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw understanding there, not the distant sympathy of someone who'd never struggled, but the recognition of someone who understood what it meant to carry heavy burdens. The moment was broken when the bus pulled into the hospital stop. Sarah gathered her things quickly, but this time she looked back as she headed for the exit. Thank you, she said, for understanding. Over the following weeks, their morning bus rides developed a comfortable rhythm. Sarah still sat 2 rows behind David, but they began to exchange small pleasantries. She learned he visited his mother at Riverside's long-term care facility every Tuesday and Friday. He discovered that Miguel loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist. David began bringing in extra coffee on the bus, the good kind from the shop near his office building, and would offer it to Sarah on particularly cold mornings. She always accepted gratefully, and slowly, the walls between their worlds began to thin. One Thursday in March, Sarah wasn't on the bus. David found himself checking his watch, wondering if she was all right. When she didn't appear Friday either, genuine concern settled in his chest. The following Monday, Sarah returned, but she looked terrible. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shook slightly, and she seemed smaller somehow, as if the week had physically diminished her. Are you okay? David asked as she passed his seat. Sarah paused, and for a moment, it looked like she might break down entirely. Miguel's in the hospital. His asthma got bad and he stopped breathing for a minute. They got him back, but her voice cracked. Without thinking, David stood up. Which room? What? Your son. Which room is he in? Pediatric ICU, room 314, but you don't have to. I'd like to meet him, David said simply. If that's okay. That afternoon, David appeared in the doorway of room 320, carrying a bag from the hospital gift shop. Miguel was awake, breathing with the help of a nebulizer, his small face dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. You must be Miguel, David said, approaching the bed slowly. I'm David. I ride the bus with your mom. Miguel's eyes widened with curiosity rather than fear. Are you the man who gives Mama coffee? David smiled. That's me. She told me you like dinosaurs. From the bag, David pulled out a comprehensive book about paleontology, complete with detailed illustrations and fold-out posters. Miguel's face lit up despite his obvious fatigue. This is awesome. Look, Mama, it's a T-Rex. Sarah watched from the corner of the room, tears in her eyes for entirely different reasons now. She'd been alone in this fight for so long that kindness from a stranger felt almost overwhelming. David spent an hour with them, reading about velociraptors and answering Miguel's endless questions with patience that surprised Sarah. When visiting hours ended, he left his business card with the nurse's station. If there's anything you need, he told Sarah quietly. Anything at all. 2 days later, Sarah received a call that changed everything. The hospital's billing department informed her that an anonymous benefactor had paid Miguel's medical bills in full. David had used most of his savings and taken a significant loan, but seeing Miguel's bright smile was worth every penny. When she confronted David on the bus the next morning, he didn't deny it. Why? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. David was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the passing Chicago streetscape. Finally, he spoke. My mother raised me alone after my father left when I was 6, right after I was diagnosed with asthma. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at dawn, watching other people's kids in the afternoon. I watched her slowly break under the weight of trying to give me everything I needed. He turned to look at Sarah. I worked my way up from warehouse floors to management, but by the time I was making good money, it was too late. Early onset dementia. She doesn't remember those hard years now, doesn't remember how strong she was, or how I promised her I'd make something of myself. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. David. Every Tuesday and Friday, I sit with her at Riverside. She doesn't know who I am anymore, but sometimes she'll hold my hand and tell me about her son, this amazing kid who was going to change the world. She's proud of someone she doesn't remember. His voice was rough with emotion. I can't give those years back to her, can't undo the stress and worry that probably contributed to her condition. But maybe I can help someone else's mother. Maybe I can make sure Miguel remembers his mom as strong and proud, not broken by circumstances she couldn't control. The bus had reached the hospital stop, but neither of them moved. Sarah reached across the aisle and took David's hand. She knows, Sarah said quietly. Somewhere in her heart, she knows what a good man she raised. Over the following months, David became an unexpected friend in their lives, but slowly, organically. He didn't sweep in like some knight in shining armor, instead, he showed up. Consistently, reliably. He attended Miguel's kindergarten graduation as the honorary uncle Miguel had asked him to be. He helped Sarah research night school programs to become a medical technician. He taught Miguel to play chess during occasional weekend visits to the park. Most importantly, he understood that Sarah needed to maintain her independence, her dignity. When she got a better job at the hospital lab, he celebrated with genuine joy. When she bought her first reliable car with money she'd saved from her new position, he was as proud as if it had been his own achievement. 2 years after that first morning on the bus, Sarah sat in her usual seat, now driving her own car to work most days but still taking the bus on Fridays, a tradition she'd grown to cherish. David had gotten his car fixed long ago but still rode the Friday route, visiting his mother and catching up with Sarah when their schedules aligned. I keep thinking about that morning, Sarah said, watching the familiar Chicago neighborhoods roll past. I was so embarrassed. Changed both our lives, David replied with a smile. I was so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that I forgot what actually mattered. Sarah nodded, thinking of how different things were now. Miguel was thriving in school, his asthma well managed with proper medication and regular checkups. She'd completed her medical technician certification and was now working toward specializing in pediatric respiratory therapy, inspired by her son's journey and the gaps she'd seen in the healthcare system. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become, Sarah said softly. David smiled, thinking of the woman in room 237 at Riverside who still sometimes held his hand and talked about her son's bright future. I hope so. And I hope she knows that helping you and Miguel, it helped me remember who I wanted to be. As the bus pulled into the hospital stop, Sarah gathered her things for her shift in the lab. David would continue on to visit his mother, as he did every Friday, sometimes bringing Miguel along when Sarah worked weekends. They'd learned that kindness wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tale rescues. It was about showing up, being present, and understanding that sometimes the most profound connections come from simply being human together. The weight of kindness had transformed not just one life, but created an unexpected family of choice, built on friendship, mutual respect, and the understanding that we all need someone to lean on sometimes. That evening, David visited his mother, as he did every Tuesday and Friday. She smiled when he entered her room, though he knew she didn't recognize him. Tell me about your son, she said, as she often did. For the first time in years, David smiled widely as he began to speak. He's good, Mom. Really good. And he's not alone anymore. He's learned that friendship can be the most powerful force of all. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered in the evening light, and somewhere across the city, a little boy was falling asleep to stories about dinosaurs and dreams, secure in the knowledge that kindness could appear in the most unexpected places, sometimes in the simple act of offering a shoulder to someone who needed rest, and sometimes in the lifelong friendship that could grow from such small beginnings.